Greetings, everyone. Welcome to our exclusive Global Leading Voices webinar campaign. We are delighted to have you join us here today. Please be informed that if you have any questions during the presentation, you may type them into the question box in your control panel. The presenter will answer your questions at the end of the presentation accordingly. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to our presenter, who will begin shortly.
Well, welcome everybody to the webinar hosted by the PCB on moving to a new business as usual after COVID-19. We've got here also Sicco Santema as a presenter. My name is Rinske Geerlings. Sicco, you want to welcome the group?
Yeah, welcome.
Yeah, and great to see so many of you coming from literally all parts of the planet. I believe PCB has presence now in more than 70 or 80 countries. Maybe Albana can explain a little bit later in the webinar, but it's yeah, great to see so many people from all over the world tuning in today. So hopefully you learned from us, and hopefully you get to share in the chat a little bit from each other as well, and sharing some strategies and thoughts. And we look forward to entertaining you for the next hour or so. So I'm the first to be able to start. You see a little bit of background on me here on this slide. Also, some of you may have tuned in May. I presented a webinar then with Wolfgang together on similar topics, but more on the pitfalls around COVID-19 and the blind spots. Yeah, you may have retained some of that information. That was more during COVID-19 when everybody was starting to kind of, unfortunately, invent the wheel on how to cope. Now we're a little bit further in the whole progress. We're not at the end, but at least we're starting to think about, hey, what is this teaching us? What is COVID-19? What benefits are there? How can we learn from what we've just dealt with or are still dealing with? And how can we take that into the future and make our businesses better with that new information? So that's what my presentation will focus on a more individual business basis, whereas Sicco's will be also looking at beyond that. So as a business, you're not alone. You also have relationships with other businesses, interactions, and he will tap into that sort of more network side of things. Yeah. And hubs, as you could call them. Yeah. So a little bit of background here. You can see there's a picture of me in lots of different countries. I absolutely love traveling. It's a big challenge for me that we are not able to travel so much at the moment. But you can also see a picture of Holland in there at the top right. And the Dutch are kind of disaster planners of the planet. We are 70 or maybe 80% underwater. What is the latest statistic? You know, so we learn from the start of being born actually how to deal with too much water around us, and lots of people specialize in that. So yeah, I guess that's where my potentially my subconscious interest in disaster recovery and business continuity has come from. You can see I've been a PCB Gold partner since 2013 as well. Really interested in how PCB helps us all to get this knowledge about especially the ISO standards around risk and security and continuity, how to get people to learn according to good practice, global best practice and good principles, and get certification in that. So yeah, it's been great to be part of the PCB family. So what you see here is a question for all of you. What I'd like you to do is think about this particular question, whether capturing lessons learned and potential future improvements from the whole lockdown, and whilst the lockdown is or was ongoing, who's actually been thinking about that for their own business or for client businesses, for example, on how they can actually improve their future BAU, their future daily business. So how we're going to manage all these interactions is through the chat box. You may see a button there on your screen where you can chat. Please feel free to put some comments in there and actually share your thoughts with others who are also tuning in. I've got that chat box open as well, but I'll continue the conversation here from my end. But if we see something exciting or interesting, maybe Albana and Sicco and the rest can sort of keep an eye on it as well, and we can take some of those questions at the end of the webinar. So after my presentation and Sicco's, there's some time for questions, so we can share some thoughts there. Now, and the reason why this question is up here is that I've observed with organizations that I've worked for in business continuity land, that a lot of them kept thinking, well, one day we're going to be all back in the office and then we're going to do some debriefs, you know, some what have we learned kind of moments. Well, I think what we're learning now is this whole COVID situation, it doesn't have a clear start and beginning. It was a slow onset kind of scenario, not a big fire or flood or something. It started progressively, and now it's also potentially, hopefully, phasing out progressively. And during all these different phases, we should all be thinking, what's the best practice we're picking up here? What's the lessons learned? And actually learning as we go along and improving as we go along. So please chat away in that field there. Now, what I'm going to walk through is some areas of lessons learned that I think any business can potentially benefit from. First, innovations. So what you could do is brainstorm with your team or with your clients about new service offerings and methods that they can use during future disruptions. So we've seen a lot of businesses going online these days, and they're offering services and products in different ways, from different locations, sometimes using different production facilities or supply chains, because one may be disrupted or another one may be more efficient. So we actually have seen a lot of businesses change their normal daily business during COVID-19 and the lockdown. Now, it is obviously a good idea to then say, can we then maintain some of those, or do we need to move back to the old way? What is actually the best way for our business? What I also see too few businesses do, not many, is actually now talking to their customers, saying, and to their suppliers and other stakeholders too, to say, what actually has worked? What actually was better? Was it maybe better to deal with certain services while people were working from home, or was it better, you know, when we actually were having face-to-face meetings? Which parts do we want to move back to the old way, and which things can actually make, well, can we make better with all this new technology and different methods of work? And then also some other productivity and efficiency related measures, like reduction in staff travel. We see now that actually we've experienced that people don't travel so much. It actually works for some in a much better way. People tend to be, in some industries, more productive this way. Other industries are telling me, no, we want to be back with our colleagues. We need to actually have people around us to be able to brainstorm about things, and working from home has really degraded our innovation. Other businesses actually say it worked better because we had flexible work hours. We could sometimes have a break and you know, see our children or play with the dog and then continue. Everything is different for each business, so it's really a good idea to capture those, well, brainstorm with your staff about those things and identify the opportunities there. We also see less need for office space if people are continuing to work more remotely, but also more need for office space if we're having to change the layout, so more space between desks. And in the past, we had all this hot desking happening where 1 hour someone uses that desk and then someone else turns up and uses the same desk. Some of those policies are starting to change. Even if COVID-19 phases out, there may be other concerns for more sort of, you know, hygiene practices and more social distancing. So you can see it's not a clear-cut scenario like we normally would have with a building fire or a flood or a cyber attack, where it usually has a start and a finish. This thing is a little bit more fluid, this whole COVID situation. Sometimes we've seen businesses automating more or using different staff shifts, for example, also outsourcing, or rather than outsourcing, bringing certain activities in-house. All of those new things we need to evaluate and say, what can we actually use for future optimization? Here's some case studies for you. So you can see here the freight industry running out of storage space during COVID-19, not being able to distribute certain products to stores. Retail stores being shut, therefore not needing new products. A lot of wharves, for example, and you know, areas where there was lots of container space. They have had phases of being really over crammed and not being able to ship. Another one here is business interruption cover. You see a whole seafood chain sues an insurer over business interruption cover. So they said, oh, COVID-19, we should be covered for this. And the insurer potentially said, oh, well, no, this was not part of our, you know, what should I say, our insurance policy. So you see quite a few interesting challenges coming up due to COVID-19. Telecommunication companies, there's a few examples from Australia where I'm normally based. yeah, where actually you can see they're a lot more working together, cartel style, you know, actually working together to be able to service the whole community with enough internet. You know, whereas in the past we would say, oh no, they can't work together, or no, they should maintain differences in pricing and competitiveness. And now there's a lot of different rules around that that have been applied. Another really interesting one is cloud. Services from the cloud, they seem like, oh, great, we don't need our own BCP. If we put everything in the clouds, it's someone else's problem, right? Well, my vision on that is someone else's problem, yes, but it's just someone else's computer, right? You still need to know, is this thing going to survive the next sort of hiccup when it comes to supply chain disruptions or COVID or downtime in internet, etc. So cloud comes with benefits, but cloud services also come with increased risk. Yeah, having all your eggs in one basket with one cloud storage provider, for example, can actually give you more risk. So whilst there's benefits, yeah, I always see there's never just upsides to a certain strategy. There's always a different form of challenge. As long as you're aware of it and you choose that freely, that's fine. But don't think, oh, we're now covering ourselves in full because of cloud and services related to cloud. And then you can see here a few other ones, like call centers that were maybe in your area not affected by COVID and people are starting to work again. Maybe in a different part of the world, those call centers are shut and you're using them as an external provider. And now you're finding, you know, we actually have a dependency on them and they're down. What do we do next? So sometimes it's not so local. You know, you may have a local situation with COVID that is fairly well managed, or like we had in Australia for well, a number of weeks, where we're all starting to move a little bit back to normal, you know, and that's in some states progressing. But in other states, that may not be the case. You know, you may have heard about the recent Melbourne or Victoria outbreaks, etc. So it's very local that you sometimes get these impacts. And you see some really nice, happy stories around this whole COVID situation, where companies who said, oh, I've just built a factory to make, in this case, gin, a form of alcohol. And they actually worked out, hey, we can make hand sanitizers with the same equipment. Let's switch to that and at least help the population get their sanitizers and in the meantime make a profit. So that's the good, well, the happy stories around some of these challenges around COVID. And this one, the first day that in New Zealand, KFC and McDonald's opened their doors again, they ran out of food within a few hours, I think. So in the first day, that's a major business continuity event, right? Not being able to service that population. So you can see how quickly people respond to some of these changes and sometimes have very emotional behaviors or emotional responses around these that are not so logical, but they're just excited, you know, they want to get a McDonald's burger. So yeah, we see a lot of different stories there. Now, the next question for the chat, if you're enjoying a bit of discussion there, which tools have you implemented to optimize your remote work technology? For example, what connectivity have you organized for staff at home? What about device security? Now, you may have had a fully secured laptop from the office that if you link it up at home to a Wi-Fi network, you need different security around it. Has that worked for you? Or have you optimized that situation? Have your IT departments in your businesses be able to optimize those challenges? What about phone diversion procedures? I remember calling one of our clients and the first message I got is pretty much a beeping tone, you know, and the first 3 or 4 days when all these businesses started to go to work from home, they hadn't actually discovered yet how to divert their incoming phone lines. So yeah, what can you actually learn from all of that, and which of those strategies can you retain to work more effectively in your new business as usual? So once again, if you have some comments or questions, please put them in the chat. Yeah, and have a bit of a sharing in parallel to the presentation that myself and Sicco are doing, because I know that there's some of you that have actually implemented really smart tools around all of this and that others can learn from. Now, the second area of improving your business as usual is your internal work practices. So not so much innovations, but just working in a different way together. I've heard a lot of people say one-on-one conversations with staff were becoming more important. There were staff sitting at home, trying to keep themselves focused, not actually knowing how to stay productive like they would be in the office. having certain concerns about their health or about the future or about their financial situation. Well, we found some managers making themselves actually more available, for that support, even if it's emotional support, like having your manager more available to you can be quite productive there, and also just a good practice. Now, the first point there is more productivity during disruptions. You see a lot of tools there and a lot of devices that businesses didn't have. We see some business, the very last client I worked on site, they actually switched to two-way radios when on top of everything, the mobile network went down in the beginning of COVID breaking out. And they actually relied more normally on mobile telephony if the office was affected by something like a pandemic. But in this case, that wasn't working. So they actually switched to two-way radios very quickly. Spare laptops is another area. I remember the shelves were completely empty in the first few weeks of COVID because every single small business, every single big business, every individual was looking at, oh my goodness, I've got to work from home. I need better devices. The same with mobile handsets. We've seen some businesses preloading SIM cards with numbers and things on it in case there was a internet failure whilst people are working from home, and then having really no other way to communicate. Yeah, and if you're thinking I'm a doomsday person, well, that's not really the case. But the internet going down is not something that is unimaginable. We're not talking Godzilla here. We're talking something that's happened many times in many geographical areas, in many countries where internet or data services generally are down. And during COVID-19 lockdown, if you're still working from home, I mean, that's a major, major challenge. In the past, you could say, oh, well, if the internet's down, we'll just meet face to face. Well, now we've got two strategies that don't work anymore if that's the case. Now, another area was, people buying new headsets, other sort of remote voicemail setup things, and all these different tools that you can use to live through this. Another question then to ponder over and for you to comment on if you like. How are you staying productive during a disruption if you're unable to sit together with your colleagues? And what are your key challenges there? So you may be working in a fairly innovative company where there's a lot of brainstorming that you do with others. Have you been able to use automated tools, video calling, conferences, or remote brainstorming tools? Have you been able to use those? Or would you say, no, we're actually pausing all those projects and we're waiting to be back together? I've heard call center people saying similar things where, yes, it's all right that I'm logging on from home, but in the past, I would just turn around to the seat next to me and talk to a colleague about a particular challenge that I had with a client. And now I can't really do that easily. There's no coffee machine conversations anymore, or the water cooler conversations. All of that impacts on a certain way to work together. And what can you learn there from now that can be applied in your new business as usual? And which staff are actually more happy to work from home? Yeah, it's really very personal sometimes. So once again, please share your thoughts in the chat box as you like. Area 3 is external collaboration. So I've heard quite a lot of businesses say, yeah, we had set up, for example, Microsoft Teams or WebEx, but our clients all expected us to use Zoom, and there was some problem with security. We couldn't set it up and we couldn't use it. So what productivity tools did your clients, your suppliers, and other counterparts actually prefer during the lockdown? And what can you maintain over the future months and years to come? Yeah, so it's quite important to align yourself with the rest of the world, especially now that we're using all these automated tools. And then, of course, when you've chosen the right ones, well, organize for the licensing, the installation, the staff training. Many times in the beginning of COVID-19, I've heard businesses say, yeah, we gave people a video conferencing tool, but the way they're behaving on it, I mean, they're sitting there in their pajamas, or they're walking around with the dog walks past, etc. Whilst it all sounds like fun, but it also super distracts everybody. So it's there's a bit of etiquette you can build around those things, and that's something you can maybe build for your future business as usual as well when you're using these tools, especially with external parties. Another question here. If in your business, whether it's a small business or a large business, if you had internet and mobile telephony going down for a couple of days, what does your BCP actually say? Do you have a business continuity plan for that? Many people revert from one to the other. They say, well, if the internet's working, but the mobile telephony goes down, we'll switch to the other form. You know, we'll just use WhatsApp, for example, or Skype or something. If the mobiles go down and the internet, if the internet goes down and the mobiles are working, we'll just use SMS or something. But what if both go down? We've seen this situation in my home country, in the Netherlands. We saw one provider having both services going down on the same day due to a fire, and people had to work it out as they go along. A lot of businesses were struggling with this. They were not prepared. So especially during COVID-19, you may have had some more hours in a day because you don't have to travel so much. I would focus on building business continuity strategies around those scenarios. And then the fourth area, the actual transition to the new normal. I've heard people say, oh, we'll just move one department or one office or one floor, or we'll do it on certain days of the week. That's these staff members can go back to the office and the other ones are going in different days of the week. But what I also heard staff say is, oh, thank God, I can go back to the office. I can meet all my colleagues again. The first thing we're going to do is go for coffee to a busy coffee shop, and we're all going to travel back on the train. Or we're going to all do, what do you call it, carpooling together, those things. And so if your office has the segregation of space, but all the other elements in the daytime of your staff are not having those particular segregations, well, you might want to think twice if it's really that smart to say only Monday and Wednesday we get this department back in the office, and Tuesday, Thursday the others, or whatever. It can create a lot more complication too, you know. So think through those strategies properly and ensure appropriate stages of those strategies for people like facilities who need to provide the desks and the seats, people like HR who have to provide also the medical / hygiene kind of provisions, and also for IT to manage the transition, including the technology side of things. Yeah, really make it a phased approach, make sure it's properly tested, and not just say, hey guys, let's all go back to the office on the day that we're allowed. And then the fifth area is better risk management. That's the last area I'm highlighting here. And that is really two main areas. One is all about information sharing. Yeah, you can see here some aspects that some of you are more expert at than me, but things like, you know, the technology aspects like WPS protection, VPN licensing, patching of all your systems, your endpoint security, malware, virus scanners. I've heard businesses say during COVID, oh, I will just lift that security measure because from home, staff can otherwise not log into the business systems. And it's like, wow, you've got this risky situation already. You've got this interim situation of not being used to having to work from home and collaborating in different ways. And now you're going to lift a certain security measure on top of that, whilst you're hearing everywhere that there's hackers actually making use of this situation, you know, of people working from home on more, on less secure networks, on more vulnerable components, you know. So that's the sort of things I've heard people say. Another organization I've heard say that, oh, if the mobile networks go down, we'll just remove the requirement for, you know, two-factor authentication. You know, when you have to put in on your mobile phone a code to be able to access a business system or something. Well, those sorts of ideas, I would say, especially during these situations, and learn from these situations for the future as well. But those are not good practices for the years to come either. You know, when you go back to normal or halfway back to normal, with staff working from the office again, and they're interacting with other parties that are not working from the office, but more on sort of, you know, mobile devices and bring your own devices, those security measures you should really fine tune even more, because it's just less controlled environments. And then there's, of course, you know, what you can do as well is conduct, for example, an ISO 27001 gap analysis and information security awareness sort of program around that, etc. And then you can see here another bullet around BCP. That's, of course, my pet subject. So I think we all made plans for the immediate impact events in the past, fires, floods, power failures, IT failures. But the slow onset events like pandemics and supply chain disruptions that are more fluid and not so clear cut, we should really optimize our efforts in that regard. And thankfully, I've got quite a few clients who are ready now to do workshops around those topics and really want to nail those things and properly get a handle on it. Okay, now the final slide I've got here is purely around BCP. You see in my previous slide, I talked about making better plans. What I'd like to say here is make your BCPs practical, you know, actually work when you need them most. Not 500 pages of black text on white paper really make them hands-on, ensure your staff are incident ready with quick reference cards, mini invocations, really practicing things rather than having some sort of big manual or novel somewhere sitting there that's collecting dust on the shelf. Less is more, of course, reducing documents volume, I mentioned. Fun and engaging. I mean, get people hands-on in terms of interactive workshops, some what I would call gamified techniques, red teaming, etc. Really getting people to feel what it is like if a real disaster or incident were to happen, and how they can use those quick reference cards, etc. And then there's, of course, culture. The point of staff being able to make mistakes during those exercises, and that making mistakes is okay, because the more mistakes we make before an actual disaster, we can actually fix those root causes behind them, rather than people trying to make themselves look good during the exercise. And I see those behaviors sometimes, but it's important to knock them on the head very quickly. And the last point there is global best practice. For proper BCP, like with disaster recovery and risk management and security, we need to apply up-to-date sort of principles and standards. So the ISO standards all around this, whilst they're not one size fits all, you still have to tweak them and massage them to fit your organization. There are still really good principles and also really good checklists to not forget any particular important aspects around this. So I would really recommend looking into, if you're new to the PCB, you don't even know what PCB is, maybe you should look at their website and have a look how many fantastic frameworks they support, and how much you can learn from their e-learning as well as their classroom training, hopefully again in the future, what I normally do as well in Australia and beyond. So yeah, I would say there is a lot of material there, and you can optimize your business as usual with all of that. So yeah, hope you enjoyed that. We'll continue to monitor that chat, and I'm handing over now to Sicco Santema. He's going to talk to you guys for the next 20, 25, 30 minutes, and we'll leave some questions for answers. Virtual applause. Wow. You're most welcome.
I would like to continue with a small introduction. As you can see here, I'm working on what's called Dependency Theories, which is a kind of opposed against the myself and I typical economical way of working. And I will explain a lot of that more during my presentation. I do that in the academic world as well as in the consulting world in the Netherlands. And here you see some of the topics for today. I really think, or I'm working on a philosophy on how dependency thinking can add to the resilience of networks, not so much organizations or smaller groups, but full networks. And I'll dive into that. And the same goes for my presentation. If you have any remarks, please put them in the chat or save them to the Q&A at the end of the presentation. Let's start very simple. We all work in silos. That can be departments, families, daily business, football team, or communities. And we are kind of related to each other. And the typical way to create resilience is to build a specific continuity plan for that, let's say, football team. So you regard the world as large as your own department or your own team. And the business continuity plan is mainly focused at the daily business of that particular smaller team. If we enlarge that to organizations, you see a multi-silo departments working together. And here you see that they, the same holds for, oh, what's happening? The same, here, the question here is how to create resilience. And now we build business continuity plans throughout the whole organization, which is interesting because we now have a different angle to it. Let's add shareholders of a particular organization, and they will look at business continuity from what Rinske already said, productivity side, or even profit. or shareholder value and keep the shareholder value up. So here you have to combine somehow the, let's say, departmental goals with the organizational goals and how to create it. And I find that very interesting because the typical goal of an administrative department or compliance department is backward looking and what has happened and how can we work with that. And if you have a sales silo in there as well, they will typically look at how can we have forward looking and keep sales volume up and well, look at it in a more opportunistic way. So you have all these different angles, different goals within one organization. And well, the big question for me is how can we create congruency on the goal set? And now, and this is all done in reality. So it's there and that's fine. If we now move on to networks, and here we have, let's say, a network of 6 organizations now, and we call them multi-organizations in networks. And now the big question is, how do we create resilience in this particular network? And that's where Rinske and I are always talking about, because the typical way to do it is the typical way we do it in practice is that we build business continuity plans per organization. And as Rinske said earlier on, we look at suppliers or customers from our perspective and put that in our business continuity plan. And so does another party and another one, and all 6 build their own business continuity plan. So now it starts to get, let's say, really funny, because here you have a set of suppliers and customers all together, and they each build their own business continuity plan, relating it to the outside world. Well, I call this, or in science, this is called the multi-ecocentric equilibrium. I will repeat that one because it's 4 difficult words in one term. Multi-ecocentric equilibrium. And if you want to read more about that, look for what's called dynamic stability. So there is an aim for stability in this network, but it's pretty dynamic. Whatever happens in a department of one of these organizations or in one of these organizations at the whole, it will kind of disturb the stability and go for a new stability, new level, a different level of stability. But it is pretty chaotic to have a continuity plan for all these independent organizations accidentally forming a network. So we started to look for a different way to do that. And I will start with a typical reaction to, let's say, a risk or a mishap in a supply chain. And this is a very simple one. We look at the middle one is the OEM. They have a lot of suppliers, in this case 5 organizations and 1 customer, so it's very easy. They build stuff for one particular customer. If something goes wrong, what you see is that, oh, sorry. No. What you typically see is that this OEM organization then buys suppliers and increases its value to the customer. So it will shift from, let's say, the suppliers adding 20% of added value, and the OEM now creating 80% and building everything themselves, because they think they are more resilient when they do all the risky parts internally in their own organization. And that matches obviously with the idea that I can control my own organization. I call that me, myself, and I organizations, right? So, and what then happens if this OEM is less dependent on their suppliers, the customer becomes more dependent on this particular OEM, because they can't, for let's say spare parts or other means, they can't go to the suppliers anymore because they are inherent and built in the OEM's organization. So what you see is that the OEM might become more resilient, and then the customer definitely becomes less resilient because of this larger dependency on only one particular supplier. And I think, or in our way of looking at it, we don't want that. So we want more resilient customers. And the idea is that we can create resilience in the network and end up with more resilient customers as well. Let's give an example, and this is an obvious one. It's a pre-COVID-19 one, the Boeing 737 MAX. Having difficulty with specific suppliers, and the batteries is one, and there were some others. But what you see here is that they kept on producing it because they promised their customers their aircraft. And what you see now, after the COVID-19 situation, is that they all canceled, not all, many of them canceled the orders. So it is really interesting what will happen to this whole network of independent companies building this 737 MAX, because if these the cash flow related to these aircrafts not being sold, or at least not being delivered, is not going to be paid. So it has a huge effect on all parties in that particular chain. And obviously this example is a bit simplified, but the point is clear. Another one is, well, the typical empty shelves in the shops, because there is enough production, but it somehow couldn't get into the retail shops, and Rinske talked about that as well. And a typical Dutch one was toilet paper, and I'm not sure whether it's okay. Rinske says it was in Australia as well, and in other countries. For some reason, we all started to buy toilet paper, so that's the customer reaction to COVID, and then the retail shops were not didn't anticipate on that, whereas in the production facility there was enough. So it's just a shortcoming of one of these organizations in the network. Another example, a large building. Well, we all know construction firms, but due to COVID, there was lots of problems with production somewhere in the supply chain, and therefore this beautiful building was delayed, and the customer was not satisfied or not happy at all. And another good example is tunnel building, where we see that the constructors realize that they are very dependent on the manufacturers of this tunnel digging machines. So they start to build cooperative kind of alliances to build the tunnel. And there the idea came that if you are dependent on a particular supplier, why don't you add dependency in your business continuity plan and start talking with that particular supplier to reduce the risks on supplying, or in this case, realizing a project. So here again, oh, here's the animation. Let's try to. You will find these in the slide deck as well. So now we thought of a different way of thinking, and we started to look in what we call expertise thinking. And you see a simple learning curve here. If we drive for the first time, it's very complex. Or let's say the change of tires, it will take each of us probably a quarter or 20 minutes. And in the Formula One, they are kind of experienced in doing that, and they have all the equipment in there. And it takes 1.7 seconds now to do that. So they really experienced. Point here is, if you find somebody in the supply chain that is very experienced in what they do, and you can utilize that expertise within your own organization, you see at the right, risk go down, cost go down, quality goes up, and profit goes up. So that's a unbelievable combination of effects. And if you look in the classic economic theories, well, at least cost up and quality up is always combined together, and we see the opposite. If you're good at something, it's less costly to produce stuff. So And that's another one, a result of lots of studies at the TU Delft as well. The better you are, the simpler things are, which also is complexity and difficulty is not something per se, but it's in the eye of the beholder. So if I'm good at something, it is easy for me, and it might be difficult for anybody else. And there's the point that if it's difficult for me and I can find somebody who is an expert in that particular field, it's easy for them. If I can integrate that particular expertise in my business continuity plan, I'm fixed. And here you see how we try to create that, to build alliances with particular suppliers. And this still is an existing model of integrators in a network. And what you see is they add only 10% of the value, and they combine or integrate all the expertise from particular suppliers, and in that way deliver 100% of the value to customers. Profit goes up for all parties in the supply chain, and the resilience goes up as well, because the expert partners in the supply chain know how to deal with mishaps and risks and disturbances. And I found this picture and I love it very much, because the top three of them is what is typically happening in the classic economic philosophies. If I give something to my suppliers that's cost for me and therefore my profit goes down, I don't want it. So there's contracts and there's fights and negotiations and things going on between suppliers and customers. And if you look at the bottom two, that really is, well, if we cooperate and take care of each other's interests, we can harvest results at the supplier end as well as at the customer's end. And if we add this dependency thinking and embracing dependency in the supply network, the typical spot in the network is to do that at the integrator, who, and now you see the red arrows as well, who will, well, supply or give back all the information from the resilient customer end, from the market side, and also the money distributed to the suppliers. It will make them even more resilient to what happens. So here we get the remarkable results that the speed to market, so the time it takes to have all the value delivered to the market parties, goes up, which means that it is 25 to 30% faster. So imagine what happens if you can get all the goods and services out of your network in 25% shorter time. That's a very large contribution to resilience of that part, because you miss, let's say, 1 year of keeping stuff in stock or logistics or whatever, where it's shifting in the network. You don't have that anymore. So we have wonderful results there. Total cost go down. That's an easy one. If the speed to market is up, you simply have reduced costs. So there your profit goes up as well for being fast, which is a non-believable results if you do it this way. The agility, so the responsiveness to change in the network goes up as well. And that's why we say the resilience as a net result of all this goes up as well. So we have lots of examples here on, and mainly on the project side, on large constructing sites, roads and house building. And you really see these good results here, but it needs a party that says, I will open up my organization, I will share information and cash flow with particular parties in the supply chain, and make us all more resilient to whatever happens in the world. It can be an upswing as well, by the way. It's, for this way of thinking, it's not always a downswing or something that's risky. For stable supply chains, a customer that's doubling its turnover with you is also a change in the disturbance. So, conclusion from the classic network, where it's very hard to build continuity all over the network, we try to come up with faster, cheaper, better networks, the work of Wouter Beelaerts from Blokland, and having an integrator in there, integrating the all the outcomes of particular suppliers into this embracing dependency kind of thinking into the resilient network, where the integrator well, serves as a kind of orchestrator for the whole network. And well, that's where we're working on. We have good examples here in the Netherlands and outside the Netherlands, also on the academic side. So this is what I would like to show you. Well, I think it's pretty simple to start, because the only thing you have to do is include the dependency talks with your partners. Don't see them as an enemy, so to say, and contracts and negotiations and prices and stuff, but simply in a sales talk or a purchasing talk, add how dependent are you on me, or am I on you? And that's a completely different angle to add. And I think in that way, dependency will also reduce or increase the business continuity, because you know what's happening with the other people that are related to your own organization. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Rinske and Sicco, for delivering this very informative and detailed webinar. As you pointed out, PCB offers training and certification courses which will show your dedication in implementing and managing business continuity frameworks, and most importantly, you will get recognized worldwide. Now, before moving with the Q&A session, I want to inform you that in addition to all the available PCB training course delivery formats, PCB has officially launched its first e-learning dynamic training courses as well. For more information, please check on the video link in the chat box that I sent you. Now we'll go ahead and take some time to answer some of the questions from the attendees regarding today's topic. Please be informed that due to time limitations, our presenters will be able to answer 2 to 3 questions. So without further ado, let's begin with the first question. The first question for today is, what is the best lesson that we can get out of COVID-19 situation?
Well, the obvious answer for me is realize that you're dependent on your environment and other organizations working in there. And so let's take the example here in the university, Technical University Delft, where we are sitting right now. We realize through the last 3-4 months that for our production, so to say, and education and research, we are so dependent on students. It's 25,000 students working with us. So there's no business if we don't include the students. And I formulated deliberately in this way because beforehand, we were an educational institute with educational directors. And so it was more important to give a lecture than to pay attention to the need of students, what they want to learn. So we're now reversing teaching as learning, and we actually call it reverse teaching. So we like to include the students in their way of finding the knowledge that they need to solve problems or to add to their skill set and well, for more experience in that. So that's too long an answer, Idina. Sorry for that, but my answer is start to realize that you are dependent on others.
Thank you, Sicco. The next question is, do you think COVID-19 has really changed our business or has just speed up some innovations that would eventually take place?
I would say it is starting to get out into normal businesses, that we have to be aware of things like COVID-19 and have to prepare for that. Not so much only in our business continuity plan, but in our daily life and how we work. And the big advantage, I think, is we experienced that we can go online and do all kinds of stuff online as a replacement of face-to-face, but not only. Like, so we call it blended contact, blended way of having contact with others, sometimes face-to-face if possible, and do as much via Teams or webinars or Zoom or Skype, contacts with groups. We even have creativity sessions now with all these initiatives on whiteboards and so on, and it works lovely. You have to train in it and so on, but I really see a strengthening in the innovative capacity of organizations because you're your creativity session, for instance, or add an expert to your problem solving.
Okay, the next question is, what are the benefits of implementing a business continuity management system, and is it too late to implement it during this time?
Yeah, look, it's I would say it's a fantastic opportunity for people who work in business continuity to take this, grab it, and actually now create the awareness amongst senior management, general staff. They've all now been confronted, well, pretty much all countries in the world are confronted indirectly or directly with this whole COVID situation. It's now the time that the awareness is maximum. Grab the opportunity, do some simple walkthroughs, some innovative workshops, whether it's online or whether you have some staff in an office. Like, for example, one of our clients, they want to start, mid-August with something in a room, but not all the staff, some of them logging in. Use all these opportunities for people actually to see that there's a need for this, for having better business continuity. This is the time to then actually, do something with it and to prepare better. Look, and when you're talking about people being together, I know some of the countries, or the people dialing in today and tuning in, are in places where there's full lockdown. I have communicated with some of our clients in Latin America the other day. They said, for example, Colombia is in full lockdown at the moment, again, Bogota, etc. So there's different locations at different stages at the moment. But the awareness of all countries and most businesses is really at its highest at the moment about the need for a plan. So use it to build better business continuity plans, and and where you can do it remotely, try those tools. I mean, I love travel and I love seminars, and as some of you may have met me at PCB conferences, I'm the first to jump on a plane and see people live, but I've also had to learn, and use the tools and explore them and try to feel the interaction in a different way. So don't wait till we're all back in a room, I think, with a better business continuity plan.
Thank you. The last question for today is, what indicators can we assess to evaluate organizational resilience?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. I wonder who asked that question and from which country they were. I love exploring this particular topics. So it depends who you ask, right? If I ask a staff member who works for one of our client organizations and they go normally to work, they just want to get their salary in the bank. For them, organizational resilience and the benefits of good business continuity, is that what you said? Business continuity, the benefits, or resilience?
Resilience.
How do you measure the?
What
how you measure the
indicators can we assess to evaluate organizational resilience?
Yeah, so if I ask a staff member who goes to work every day for their normal job, for them to say, if my organization is resilient, that means, for example, if the doors are closed tomorrow and it's payday, I'll get the money in the bank. That's pretty resilient. If I ask the senior management of the organization, they'll say, hey, our innovation projects continue no matter what happens, and we still get our business outputs, financial indicators are met. So I think it's very, very personal, and it also depends on each industry and each person you ask. But I would certainly say good indicators of good resilience. It's how well you bounce back. Now, whether that's in financial terms, whether it's in staff health and well-being terms, whether that's in productivity terms, in your relationships with customers and supplier terms, all of those come in the picture. Your reputation as an organization, are you maintaining that through incidents? That's another real indicator for me, and if I work with businesses.
Thank you. Okay, because of the time limitation, we have to conclude the webinar session. Thank you, Rinske, Sicco, again for this remarkable session, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Please be informed that this session will be recorded and posted on our website and YouTube channel along with the slides of the presentation. For more information about our webinars, please visit our website www.pcb.com. Thank you all and stay safe.